Chapter 4 of What Katy Did at School. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Karen Savage, Waco, Texas, May 2007. What Katy Did at School by Susan Coolidge. Chapter 4. The Nunnery. The night seemed short, for the girls, tired by their journey, slept like dormice. About 7 o'clock Katy was roused by the click of a blind, and opening her eyes, saw Clover standing in the window and peeping out through the half-opened shutters. When she heard Katy move, she cried out, "Oh, do come, it's so interesting. I can see the colleges and the church and, I guess, the nunnery, only I'm not quite sure because the houses are all so much alike." Katy jumped up and hurried to the window. The hotel stood on one side of a green common planted with trees. The common had a lead-colored fence and gravel paths which ran across it from corner to corner. Opposite the hotel was a long row of red buildings, broken by one or two brown ones with cupolas. These were evidently the colleges, and a large gray building with a spire was as evidently the church. But which one of the many white, green-blinded houses which filled the other sides of the common was the nunnery, the girls could not tell. Clover thought it was one with a garden at the side, but Katy thought not, because Lily had said nothing of a garden. They discussed the point so long that the breakfast bell took them by surprise, and they were forced to rush through their dressing as fast as possible so as not to keep Papa waiting. When breakfast was over, Dr. Carr told them to put on their hats and get ready to walk with him to the school. Clover took one arm and Katy the other, and the three passed between some lead-colored posts and took one of the diagonal paths which led across the common. "That's the house," said Dr. Carr, pointing. "It isn't the one you picked out, Clover," said Katy. "No," replied Clover, a little disappointed. The house Papa indicated was by no means so pleasant as the one she had chosen. It was a tall, narrow building with dormer windows in the roof, and a square porch supported by whitewashed pillars. A pile of trunks stood in the porch. From above came sounds of voices. Girls' heads were popped out of upper windows at the swinging of the gate, and as the door opened, more heads appeared looking over the balusters from the hall above. The parlor into which they were taken was full of heavy, old-fashioned furniture, stiffly arranged. The sofa and chairs were covered with black haircloth and stood closely against the wall. Some books lay upon the table, arranged 2 by 2, each upper book being exactly at a right angle with each lower book. A bunch of dried grasses stood in the fireplace. There were no pictures, except one portrait in oils of a forbidding old gentleman in a wig and glasses, sitting with his finger majestically inserted in a half-open Bible. Altogether, it was not a cheerful room, nor one calculated to raise the spirits of newcomers, and Katy, whose long seclusion had made her sensitive to the subject of rooms, shrank instinctively nearer Papa as they went in. 2 ladies rose to receive them. One, a tall, dignified person, was Mrs. Florence. The other she introduced as my assistant principal, Mrs. Nipson. Mrs. Nipson was not tall. She had a round face, pinched lips, and half-shut gray eyes. "This lady is fully associated with me in the management of the school," explained Mrs. Florence. "When I go she will assume entire control." "Is that likely to be soon?" inquired Dr. Carr, surprised, and not well pleased that the teacher of whom he had heard, and with whom he had proposed to leave his children, was planning to yield her place to a stranger. "The time is not yet determined," replied Mrs. Florence. Then she changed the subject gracefully, but so decidedly that Dr. Carr had no chance for further question. She spoke of classes and discussed what Katy and Clover were to study. Finally she proposed to take them upstairs to see their room. Papa might come too, she said. "I dare say that Lily Page, who tells me that she is a cousin of yours, has described the arrangements of the house," she remarked to Katy. "The room I have assigned to you is in the back building, Quaker Row, the girls call it." She smiled as she spoke, and Katy, meeting her eyes for the first time, felt that there was something in what Lily had said. Mrs. Florence was a sort of queen. They went upstairs. Some girls who were peeping over the baluster hurried away at their approach. Mrs. Florence shook her head at them. "The first day is always one of license," she said, leading the way along an uncarpeted entry to a door at the end, from which, by a couple of steps, they went down into a square room, round 3 sides of which ran a shelf, on which stood rows of wash-bowls and pitchers. Above were hooks for towels. Katy perceived that this was the much-dreaded washroom. "Our lavatory," remarked Mrs. Florence blandly. Opening from the washroom was a very long hall, lighted at each end by a window. The doors on either side were numbered 1, 2, 3, and so on. Some of them were half open. As they went by, Katy and Clover caught glimpses of girls and trunks, and beds strewed with things. At number 6 Mrs. Florence paused. "Here is the room which I propose to give you," she said. Katy and Clover looked eagerly about. It was a small room, but the sun shone in cheerfully at the window. There was a maple bedstead and table, a couple of chairs, and a row of hooks. That was all, except that in the wall was set a case of black-handled drawers, with cupboard doors above them. "These take the place of a bureau and hold your clothes," explained Mrs. Florence, pulling out one of the drawers. "I hope, when once you are settled, you will find yourselves comfortable. The rooms are small, but young people do not require so much space as older ones. Though, indeed, your elder daughter, Dr. Carr, looks more advanced and grown up than I was prepared to find her. What did you say was her age?" "She is past 16, but she has been so long confined to her room by the illness of which I wrote, that you may probably find her behind in some respects. Which reminds me," this was very adroit of papa, "I am anxious that she should keep up the system to which she has been accustomed at home. Among other things, sponge baths of cold water every morning, and as I see that the bedrooms are not furnished with washstands, I will ask your permission to provide one for the use of my little girls. Perhaps you will kindly tell me where I could look for it?" Mrs. Florence was not pleased, but she could not object, so she mentioned a shop. Katy's heart gave a bound of relief. She thought number 6, with a washstand, might be very comfortable. Its bareness and simplicity had the charm of novelty. Then there was something very interesting to her in the idea of a whole house full of girls. They did not stay long after seeing the room, but went off on a shopping excursion. Shops were few and far between at Hillsover, but they found a neat little maple washstand and rocking chair, and papa also brought a comfortable low chair with a slatted back and a cushion. This was for Katy. "Never study till your back aches," he told her. "When you are tired, lie flat on the bed for half an hour, and tell Mrs. Florence that it was by my direction." "Or Mrs. Nipson," said Katy, laughing rather ruefully. She had taken no fancy to Mrs. Nipson, and did not enjoy the idea of a divided authority. A hurried lunch at the hotel followed, and then it was time for Dr. Carr to go away. They all walked to the school together and said good-bye upon the steps. The girls would not cry, but they clung very tightly to papa, and put as much feeling into their last kisses as would have furnished forth half a dozen fits of tears. Lily might have thought them cold-hearted, but papa did not. He knew better. "That's my brave girls," he said. Then he kissed them once more, and hurried away. Perhaps he did not wish them to see that his eyes, too, were a little misty. As the door closed behind them, Katy and Clover realized that they were alone among strangers. The sensation was not pleasant, and they felt forlorn as they went upstairs and down Quaker Row toward number 6. "Aha! So you're going to be next door," said a gay voice as they passed number 5, and Rose Red popped her head into the hall. "Well, I'm glad," she went on, shaking hands cordially. "I sort of thought you would, and yet I didn't know. And there are some awful stiffies among the new girls. How do you both do?" "Oh, are we next door to you?" cried Clover, brightening. "Yes, it's rather good of me not to hate you, for I wanted the end room myself, and Mrs. Florence wouldn't give it to me. Come in and let me introduce you to my roommate. It's against the rules, but that's no matter. Nobody pretends to keep rules the first day." They went in. Number 5 was precisely like number 6 in shape, size, and furniture, but Rose had unpacked her trunk and decorated the room with odds and ends of all sorts. The table was covered with books and boxes, colored lithographs were pinned on the walls, a huge blue rosette ornamented the headboard of the bed, the blinds were tied together with pink ribbon. Over the top of the window was a festoon of hemlock boughs, fresh and spicy. The effect was fantastic but cheery, and Katy and Clover exclaimed with one voice, "How pretty!" The roommate was a pale, shy girl, with a half-scared look in her eyes, and small hands which twisted uneasily together when she moved and spoke. Her name was Mary Silver. She and Rose were so utterly unlike that Katy thought it odd they should have chosen to be together. Afterward she understood it better. Rose liked to protect, and Mary to be protected. Rose to talk, and Mary to listen. Mary evidently considered Rose the most entertaining creature in the world. She giggled violently at all her jokes, and then stopped short and covered her mouth with her fingers in a frightened way, as if giggling were wrong. "Only think, Mary," began Rose, after introducing Katy and Clover, "these young ladies have got the end room. What do you suppose was the reason that Mrs. Florence did not give it to us? It's very peculiar." Mary laughed her uneasy laugh. She looked as if she could tell the reason, but did not dare. "Never mind," continued Rose. "Trials are good for one, they say. It's something to have nice people in the room if we can't be there ourselves. You are nice, aren't you?" turning to Clover. "Very," replied Clover, laughing. "I thought so. I can almost always tell without asking. Still, it is something to have it on the best authority. We'll be good neighbors, won't we? Look here." She pulled one of the black-handled drawers completely out and laid it on the bed. "Do you see? Your drawers are exactly behind ours. At any time in silent study hour, if I have something to say, I'll rap and pop a note into your drawer, and you